Joining me now is Democratic Congressman John Delaney. Thank you for your time this afternoon.
Thanks for having me, Chanel.
First, your reaction to that praise, comparing him to Ronald Reagan.
Well, look, I think it's probably early to start comparing President Trump to President Reagan, but I think Senator Graham is right. I think President Trump's decision to launch this strike was largely a very personal, emotional decision that was obviously informed by what he saw in those horrific images coming out of that chemical attack, because this is a very different position that he's now taking with Syria than he had in the past. So He did make a very dramatic kind of pivot, if you will, towards Syria, and it had to be based, based on his reaction from seeing what unfolded, and also from, obviously the advice of his key advisors. So I think it's probably a little early to go down the path of comparing him to Ronald Reagan, but I do think it was an emotional response based on what he saw.
About a statement saying the airstrike sends a clear message that the United States is willing to hold Assad accountable for his atrocities. Yes. I'm going to get to the rest of your reaction in a moment, but I just want to get you on record. Should President Trump have consulted Congress before ordering the strike, and should he send a new authorization for use of military force for further action in Syria?
I don't think he needed to consult with Congress prior to this strike, but I do think at this point the time is right. We should come back into session this week, and we should discuss the situation in Syria. We should discuss more broadly what we're doing against the Islamic State, and we should have a new authorization of military force for our efforts against terrorism, and I think we should put one in place for whatever we decide to do in the future with Syria. So I think for this initial kind of response, I think the president acted within his authority. I don't think he had to go to Congress. But I think at this point, now that we know this has happened, now that we're not sure what Assad's response is going to be, what Russia's response is going to be, I think we have to have this discussion in the Congress, and I think we need a new authorization of military force, not only for terrorism generally, because we're relying on a very old one for that, but also for the situation in Syria.
So then, as you call on the White House to work with Congress on a strategy for Syria, since you say the administration is yet to provide one, are comments by Nikki Haley at the UN this week giving you a clearer sense of the administration's policy moving forward?
No, not really. I mean, what she's basically said is the United States is prepared to do more, but it also depends on what Assad does. So, that doesn't really tell us, what they're thinking they're prepared to do, or what the various options are based on if Assad uses chemical weapons again, what we'll do, et cetera. So, I mean, she's obviously shown determination. And she's been very firm with not only Assad, but with Russia. But it doesn't give me any insight into what their plans are. And that's why I think we really need to have Congress. I mean, Congress ultimately has the authorization. The president has limited ability to do things. And again, I think what he did fits within his. But I think at this point, we do need to have the discussion in Congress. I think it'd be healthy for the country. I think it'd be healthy for our foreign policy. And I think it would be healthy in terms of the president's relationship with the Congress.
So with that said, what's your greatest concern then about the administration's policy, given this really 180 we're seeing by the president?
Well, again, I think what the president did here was appropriate. So I'm happy with where he ended up. I didn't think his prior policies, which were to keep Assad in power, were really the right answer. So you're always concerned when people make a kind of 180-degree pivot. But the fact that he pivoted towards what I think is the right answer, I'm obviously pleased with that outcome. But, you'd like some certainty. And that's why I think we need this discussion, because I don't think we've had a fulsome conversation about what our strategy is with Syria. I think the situation in Syria, and I've been talking about this for years, has been one of the great failures of our foreign policy. And I think our failure to act early in that conflict and allow this civil war to kind of get to the point it is, where 500,000 Syrians have been killed, I think has been a great failure of American foreign policy. So I think the country needs to come together with a real strategy to deal with this situation.
There's another piece to this here. What do you say to your colleague Tulsi Gabbard, for example, who's warning the administration that the military strikes will antagonize Russia and lead to a nuclear conflict with them?
Well, it'll clearly antagonize Russia, but I think that's part of the point, right, which is Russia has clearly been supporting Assad every step of the way. Right? And so I think Russia is, in fact, complicit with respect to these chemical attacks. So, that doesn't bother me that this potentially antagonizes Russia, because I think we do need a firm pushback against Russia. obviously anything's possible. I think the likelihood of this leading to a conflict between Russia and the United States, in my own opinion, is very, very low. Of course, anything is possible, but I think that's a very low probability. And I think, again, this action relative to the very small probability of that happening, I think was the right answer.
So then finally, forward here between Syria and Congress's investigation into Russia's involvement in the U.S. election. What should we expect when Secretary of State Rex Tillerson meets with Russian officials, possibly even with President Putin in Moscow next week?
Well, what I'm hoping is that Secretary Tillerson, is very firm with Putin about what outcomes we want in Syria, and to get him to stop us supporting Assad so that we can figure out through a diplomatic process how to get Assad out of power and somehow restore some measure of stability to that region. We have a lot of issues in that region. Obviously, we have our fight with the Islamic State, which is, top of the list. We have the refugee situation, which is, a humanitarian crisis of epic proportions. And in my opinion, the response of the United States of America has been inadequate as it relates to that. And so I think we need to get Russia to stop, essentially propping up Assad so that we can actually come to some orderly kind of settlement of what's gone on in that region, which, as I said, involves getting rid of the Islamic State and restoring some type of kind of stability without Assad in power in the region. Because when you have a leader who continues to do these kind of things to his own people, you will never have stability in the region, and this civil war will consume the whole country and ultimately the region.
Just a quick follow-up there. Do you not have any concern then about leaving a vacuum there? We talked to a contributor earlier, a journalist who was concerned about al-Qaeda or ISIS stepping in to fill that void.
I mean, look, the void that's there right now, right, is kind of a bottomless pit of inhumane kind of events with civilians and children getting killed. So I can't imagine a scenario where it's worse than what we have now. So, no, I don't have any concerns about that. I mean, I think there's a role for U.S. leadership here, and I think we've got to get Russia and obviously Iran, and I think the next thing the administration and Congress should be talking about is sanctions so that we can actually start, getting to the next step in this region.
I have to leave it there. It was a good comment.